Welcome to the Card Text. This is yet another episode. This time we're starting without any prompt, and we're just going to go from here, and hopefully we can get this done without me having to edit anything. I'm joined here by Theorel and Scott.
Everybody.
Hello.
I'm Bob. So yeah, what would you guys like to talk about? We haven't recorded for, I guess, technically a month, right?
Can't actually remember the last time we recorded.
I don't know. I think it's been more than a month.
Has it really?
It might be a month since you put the last episode out.
Oh, true.
I think last time we recorded was just after the Mutant Genesis reveal.
Yes,
that would have been the last one. Well, we've had announcements since Mutant Genesis, we had announcements for Cyclops, Phoenix, and then the latest one, which was this past Wednesday or Thursday, was Wolverine. So those three.
and the scenario pack, yeah.
It's Mojo Mania.
Right. So what are your initial thoughts for those four announced previews?
There's a lot of stuff going on, I think. I'm excited to see how things develop with X-Men stuff, where all this is going. I think of the Mojo scenario looks really cool. I'm definitely looking forward to that. All three scenarios, I think, are going to be... I have high hopes. I have a lot of optimism for the Mojo scenario set. And I think on the hero side, definitely like the look of Wolverine the best. I think that's just from a mechanical angle, what looks like it would be the most fun to play. Wolverine hits that for me pretty well.
Yeah, and just to cover the aspects of those three heroes, Phoenix was justice, Cyclops was, I believe, leadership, correct me if I'm wrong, and Wolverine is aggression. What about you, Scott? Are you excited for those announced characters and scenario?
Yes, I've not had time to really look into any of them in depth. I've done sort of my usual quick scan of the articles and the cards, but yeah, not really read any of them properly. But yeah, they look good. I think, as I said in the Mutant Genesis episode, I'm not really a fan of the X-Men, so none of them are like characters that I'm particularly looking forward to. But yeah, it's more cards, and that means more opportunities to play and stuff. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm most excited for the Mojo scenario because I did want Mojo in there somewhere, and it looks interesting. Like they're doing some interesting things with, I think, the show modular. Like, are they environments? Is that what they are? The shows?
There's show environments plus 5 cards that are kind of, yes, whatever counter cards seem appropriate for the genre.
Right. And I was really excited because they also showed an ally that you can get that's in the encounter deck, I believe. It goes into the encounter deck. It's like a single card modular set, Longshot. So I'm excited for Longshot to be a hero in one of these X-Men waves. I just want to see what they're going to do with his power set. I think that would be fun. So moving away from all the previews and stuff, where we sit with all of the rulings and things that have been coming out. Alex Werner. So Alex has been giving us a lot of rulings since May, I believe, up to August. Slowed down a little bit in July, August, but there's been a lot of rulings that came down. And how are we? All right. So how are we feeling about all of those rulings that came through in that period?
Yeah, mixed feelings. I think a lot of the rulings have been very good. They're either clarifying things that we weren't sure about or confirming things that we suspected. But there have been other ones that are raising other questions, and yeah, I think there are still things that need more clarification.
Okay, I was gonna say, I think there are some ways in which, at least for myself, like I got kind of complacent with the no answers, wherein it was just kind of like, I can just make up things that I want to have it work like, and nobody can tell me different. And so, you kind of start building up these models in your mind, and it's like that is how the game works, because I figured out that this is what needs to happen for the game to be able to continue functioning after I've run across enough questions. And getting rules answers now that disrupt that, it feels like it's a much more entrenched sense of how the game is supposed to go that gets disrupted when a ruling comes out doesn't agree with my preconceived notions.
Yeah. It's well, like you said, it shatters the model that you have going there, and that can be kind of traumatic, I guess. Just to put things in perspective real quick, so Alex Werner is...
Rules specialist?
Yes, her title is rules specialist, and recently joined FFG. And as a rules specialist, I believe the description was for not just Marvel Champions, but she kind of oversees all of the games under FFG, and she communicates between the teams that are working on those games about the rules, right? And do I have that right?
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not really actively playing any other FFG games at the moment, so I haven't been submitting questions for anything else, so I don't know for certain. But yeah, that's my understanding.
Yeah, I did hear that maybe she isn't answering questions for something like Arkham, is what I heard, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me because of how on top of things MJ is. Yeah, I used to play Arkham. I've still got lots of Arkham cards. And yeah, the rules submission and answering process for that game was always a lot better than it has ever been for Marvel Champions, even when we were previously getting answers. So I wouldn't be surprised if Alex doesn't have as much to do for Arkham as she has for Marvel Champions.
Yeah, even with that workload, communicating with all the other game teams, she still has a pretty decent output for answering the questions that we send her. And we send her a lot of questions that are sometimes very long-winded.
And complicated.
So there was a recent conversation in Discord about, I guess, our goals and how they might be kind of opposed to the goals of those who are trying to help us with the rules, meaning that what we want is kind of a straightforward, general way to handle a lot of the interactions, but it seems like they cannot give us that. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I think there these questions of whether they cannot give us or whether they choose not to, and I think don't mean that in a like or withholding something from us that they know that we want, but they may have internal reasons not to want to give general answers that seem good enough to them that might be perfectly good reasons if we were aware of them. It's that sort of, we only see the one side of it, right? We just get what we get, and then have to kind of, it's difficult to know why the answer that we get is whatever it is. And so it's not like, it could be that there's management interference. It seems like there has been some management interference just because of the silence of the rules answering, the ways in which they've talked about how they're only supposed to give rules answers through official channels. So there's some things there over the past few years that have sounded like someone at the top is like making them do these things, but you can never be sure of what 100% of what's actually going on.
And would you agree with that, Scott?
Some of it, yes. I think ultimately what we want and what the designers want and what FFG as a whole want is essentially the same, is a game that we can play without having to ask lots of rules. But yeah, there probably is a degree of sort of corporate control over what Alex is allowed to say. But I think a lot of the sort of miscommunication, for the want of a better word, is down to the way the rules question submission process works. And yeah, I wouldn't call it a rant because it wasn't quite a rant, but I posted quite a bit in Discord about it, and it's a very strange way to sort of try to get rules questions answered. I mean, it's like we will have a question come up that we sort of try to answer, and we realise that there's some bit of understanding that is missing, and then that will lead to a long conversation where there's like half a dozen of us all exploring the rules and the interactions and various cards, and that conversation leads to one or more of us submitting a question about it, and that question sort of boils down all of the thought that has gone into that conversation into like a card interaction between 2 or 3 cards and then a question. And I have been in some roles in the past as a software engineer. I've been in the situation where I've had what seem like really straightforward questions sent to me, and it's only through having a face-to-face conversation that I've then learnt what is behind that question. And so I can imagine that, Alex gets these questions and she reads them. She maybe goes to Caleb and sort of talks to him about them. And I can't remember the name of the other, Tony. Yeah, probably talks to Tony as well, and possibly other people, because I know sort of the LCG team as a whole tend to work on all the games sort of collaboratively, and then she has to come back and produce an answer. And I think because of that, it's very understandable that she and the rest of the team don't see all of the stuff. And you also have to remember that the design and development team, they're working on products that we won't see for 2 years. So the questions we're asking are about products that are 2 or more years old to them. And it's very easy to forget why a card was written a particular way, what the thinking behind the design was. And so we tend to get more sort of answers along the lines of this is how this interaction works when we're looking for more sort of generalizable answers. And I just think it is a natural side effect of the method of communication. Like I think if we could, any of us in the community could sit down with Alex and Caleb and just have a conversation, we would get to the bottom of so many questions really quickly, but we can't do that.
We just have to kind of reconcile what we get from the responses.
Yeah.
No ill will or anything towards anybody who answers questions or isn't able to answer questions. We're just doing the best we can with what we get, and they're doing the best they can with what they have. So
yeah.
But any other thoughts on the whole rule specialist and how it feels to have the answers back?
I will say, in as many answers that we've gotten that have been disruptive, I also feel like we've gotten answers to a lot of long-standing questions. They just felt like we were never going to know how Ultron worked, or how Whirlwind worked. Like, those basic core set questions that we just, for whatever reason, they kept getting filtered out of the question answers. We'd ask them every few months, and still no answer. It's cool to actually know how those are supposed to work. Simple things, though they may be.
Yeah, so Ultron and Whirlwind, we do have more definitive answers on how they work. What are some others, if we could think of some? I think we know now that Overkill, for sure, the damage from Overkill does not constitute an attack, right? So if you take Overkill damage, you're not being attacked as well.
Yeah.
Overkill's keeps Overkill to me seems like a little bit of a fluid rule, in the sense that it's not quite. It started out one way, it changed pretty early on because it used to not hit alter egos, right? So they changed that pretty quickly, and then I think 1.4 saw it change to where it was simultaneous damage instead of whatever it used to be, and now it seems like it might be shifting back to not simultaneous based on some answers. So Whirlwind, Defense, and you to me have seemed like the really fluid parts of the rules that they're not quite settled.
Okay, well let's segue into defense. Previously, we made a set of rules cards for defense, and has that held up for the most part?
I have not looked at those in a long time. Are they still accurate?
I've not looked at them for ages either. I suspect they're not 100%, but they're like maybe 90%.
I think that's pretty good, 90%.
Yeah.
I think there's probably stuff we could add and tweak, but I think for the most part, it's a good starting point.
Yeah.
I think one thing that happened with these defense cards is we avoided the whole question of whether you could play defense cards in non-defending scenarios because we disagreed about it because we didn't have it settled amongst our 3-man group here.
Yeah.
That's helped in keeping these accurate. So I think the main change I notice is the recent change of if an ally is defeated, you can then defend with a defense card if you have one. Yes, so there's that, and the second one I would say is there's a bit of an emphasis about a player defending that didn't used to exist.
Yeah, because we sort of talk about the characters, either the hero or an ally defending, which under what is written in 1.4, that is correct. But yeah, the rulings we had today, or one of them, it implies that they're shifting more to a player-focused defense context, if you like. So it's one player defends an attack, and once a player is defending, no other player can. Whereas the 1.4 is one character defends an attack, and once a character is defending, no other character can. And I think that is to accommodate what happens if you defend with an ally and the ally is killed by a boost effect, and they're now saying that it then becomes undefended, and you can then play defense abilities to become the defender again.
Mm-hmm. Are they really changing it so that it's more player centric? I don't recall. I'm trying to recall what ruling that may have been.
So there was that ruling. They said that because they said specifically that another player could not defend it after your ally was defeated, because you as a player are already defending. So that's one answer that talks about player defending. The other one is Mutant Protector. Said that the defense tag in that makes you as the player the defender, even though ultimately it's your ally that defends it.
Let's backtrack a little bit. So we started talking about. I think Theorel, you mentioned that we had a disagreement about whether you could play a card. When was it? Do you repeat that?
So whether you could play a defense card outside of an attack, without becoming a defender at all.
And that was initially when the defense changes first came in, and we were trying to put together these cards to help explain. We disagreed about that, and then what was the outcome?
So the outcome is that they have, at this point, ruled that you can play defense cards outside of attacks, if you meet their triggering condition otherwise.
You did have a disagreement with that, right, Scott?
Yeah, my initial reading of the 1.4 defense rules was that you could only play defense labeled abilities during an attack, and the defense outside of an attack was meaningless. and we did get an unofficial ruling from Michael after he left FFG, which confirmed my reading of it. But then, the community, I think people had already submitted rules questions about defense to Alex, and then she came back and said, no, you can use defense labeled abilities outside of an attack. And we've since then asked lots more questions about that and what exactly that means. And essentially, if you're using it outside of an attack, you just ignore the defense label. It means nothing.
I was going to say maybe the RRG, the 1.4, was ambiguous because there was a disagreement about whether or not you could do it. They had the same internal disagreement that we had externally, their rules. So maybe it was worded carefully to avoid that point of controversy.
Yeah.
That's possible.
Yeah, it's certainly possible.
It'll make 1.5 more interesting to read, I guess. What was I going to say? Recently, we had a ruling about you could also play a defense label card during an attack against non-attack damage, and it doesn't count as a defense, right? And that seems it seems contrary to what the entry for defending tells us, right? Because it says while an attack is happening, if you play one of those cards, you're defending.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know that for a long time I held up the against an attack. You can play these to defend against the attack or something along those lines is what it says. And so I have ever since the defense thing came out, we've had conversations about this for a while, have disliked the idea that just playing a defense event during an attack could make you the defender because of how extremely complex during an attack can become. With the example that I tend to go to is the idea of a quick strike minion entering play as the result of a boost effect, which is, there's lots of ways that can happen. Although, it's still a corner case, but it's such a weird scenario that it brings that up, because you play a defense event to defend against the minion, and suddenly you're defending the outside attack, and that seems like an unintended sequence like that. It just seems wrong to me that would be the occurrence. There's ways to work around that, even if you do during. You can just accept it. That's also fine. It's not like none of those things are broken in a way that's like, oh my goodness, you can't possibly make it work this way. It seems odd to me, and so that's why I've tended to kind of emphasize that against the attack, and maybe we could define that and have that be clearer.
Yeah, we still don't know for certain what the situation with nested attacks is. But it's much clearer now that defense abilities used during an attack really only count as defending when they are against the sort of process of the attack, rather than incidental things like damage from a boost ability.
Do we have a ruling about damage from a boost ability? I mean, I have the ruling about overkill damage. Is still undefended.
What kind of ruling did you want? We have the one that said it isn't damage from an attack.
Right, but do we have a ruling that if you play a defense event against a boost ability, it does not make you the defender?
Yes, that was the recent one that came from, I think it was July.
That was overkill damage.
July 21. Oh, it was overkill damage. Oh, from a boost. Okay. Then no, I don't think we have that.
I think that's the way that it would get ruled, like if we actually got a ruling, but I just don't think we have 100% confirmation that that's true. I'm leaving it at least a little bit ambiguous whether or not they will for sure rule it that way.
And Scott, you think they would rule it that way?
Yeah, I think so. I'm just checking through Hall of Heroes. Yeah, I think the ones we've got about boost abilities are if the ally leaves play. Yeah, not specifically about damage from a boost ability.
So to clarify, the two situations we do have confirmed from rulings are Crossbone's machine gun, which is an interrupt to the attack. Defending against playing a defense event against that is definitely not defending. And overkill damage, we have a ruling that says playing shield block against that, which is a defense event, would not be defending. So those are those are the two extremes of the attack. And overkill damage is during an attack, but it's that very end step. So that's where it, me at least, leaves at least some ambiguity. I'm with Scott. I think that if we get a ruling about a boost ability that deals damage, that it'll say that doesn't count as defending. Just don't want to overstate what has been confirmed.
Yeah, I agree with you both. I think that's how it will come down versus a boost ability damage as well. So what were we talking about previously? We can get back to the Mutant Protectors rule, which I think was a little funky. It was a little strange.
Strange card.
Mutant Protectors says, or the ruling for Mutant Protectors says that, I guess, initially the player and not the character, not the hero, becomes the defender, right?
That's what it says.
And that's really odd because it's an event. It should, like, you go back and you look in the U rules, it says events that you play count as your hero doing it. But for this one, for whatever reason, it's the player. I guess because it needs to happen. But yeah, that's super strange. But I guess the player is the entity that is doing all of these things, all these processes, right? So in that sense, it makes sense, some kind of sense.
I don't know. I can't make sense of it, but
yeah, I mean, I would like it if they just removed the defense label.
Yeah, it's weird because it would work perfectly without the defense label.
Yeah, I think so too. It would be fine, right? Because then the ally that you put into play would be the defender when that triggering condition happens.
Yes. The ability reads it's hero interrupt defense label. When an enemy attacks, put an X-Men ally into play from your hand. Exhaust it and declare it the defender for this attack. And yeah, it's just a 1-cost event. So yeah, you could get rid of the defense label. It would work perfectly well, and essentially that last sentence says that basically makes the ally become the defender. So it's unnecessary for the event itself to be defense labeled.
To me, it feels like they don't want to errata it, so they're coming up with a reasoning to keep the defense label there and saying it's the player as well. Do you guys feel the same way? Or
I did until this last ruling where they talked about that the player is the defender. I mean, it's possible that this ruling then has influenced how they're talking about the scenario where an ally is defeated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's where it's coming from. But maybe they've just, you know, I mean, it's the whole like attacks are always against players kind of thing that I've. It's one of those things that they say, and it's just like, yeah, but that's not true. I understand why you're saying it, but it's not actually how the game works. Like, you guys defined the game so that characters get attacked. Why do you keep telling me that it doesn't happen? Like, that's how Retaliate works. You know, that's how these things work. That's how Drax works.
Well, I think it says both things, right? And some point in the RRG, it'll say players get attacked, and then it says characters get attacked. And I think this is part of the reason, just tangentially, why I used the term player-character in some of the cards that we were trying to do, because I think that everything that happens it happens because of the player, or like the player is involved in everything that happens in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've sort of touched on it in the past, where they sort of want you to kind of embody the identity that you're playing as, and so there is this kind of duality of the player is the character and the character is the player, and so they the language of the rules and the card text sometimes gets a bit mixed up and confusing because of that.
And it causes a little bit of a trouble when they try to do some of these generalizations that just don't generalize as far as they would like, particularly with the attacks you, right, which is the situation where attacks you is supposed to mean character whenever it can, player when it can't mean a character, but apparently attacks you always means player because players are attacked. It's kind of like, well, okay, but that's not, characters are attacked too, so that means it should mean the character. I guess it means player in this case because that's what you want it to mean, which is fine. It's just, technically that doesn't fit your generalization that you've given us.
Sorry, are those you're saying that or with regard to the older U ruling or the older U entry?
The existing U entry.
Existing one?
The idea that it's supposed to trigger off of after Ultron attacks you or after Radioactive Man attacks you or whatever, if they attack one of your allies, that still counts as you, because attacks you means player. Is basically I think that's pretty consistently their argument. It's just, it's from a strict, like, if we're gonna pull this into a logical model and force everything to obey their general rule, no, that's not correct. But it's what they want, so it's correct because it's the correct way to play the game. It's just,
So just so I'm not any more confused, I think initially you said when attacks you, but did you mean to say after attacks you?
I did mean to say after attacks you, yes.
Oh, okay. Just clearing that up. Yeah, that's a strange one. I guess it's because they had initially used the word you, right? And it's after attacks you, they can't go back and change every trigger that says.
I agree they couldn't go back and change every trigger. I just want them to put it in the rules that attacks you means player. Because it's not actually implied by their generalization. They just keep saying, yeah, it's implied.
Mm-hmm. And it's an important exception to all the other triggers, because I think now people are kind of trained to see that as attacking your character, not attacking the player and everything on their board.
Yeah.
So I think we could probably cut it off there. Did we have any final thoughts about anything that we've discussed? Or anything you guys want to bring up in particular?
Yeah, I can't think of anything really pressing that I think needs talking about now.
I think just in terms of future stuff, I think we could talk about the game state rule. I think that's coming into focus a little bit. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff with the game state rule and the resolves. It's not 100% settled on how that all works. I think there's still a few questions that are coming up with it as we're figuring it out. But I think that could make a great episode discussion.
So that is our episode number, I don't know what. Thanks for listening. And in the future, let us know, audience members, if you want us to continue doing the 3-card pick that we've done for all the previews format, which was suggested by Theorel, which is a really good format. Yeah, thanks for listening and thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate it as always.
Yep, cheers.
Bye.